Hey, what's good, self-direct investors? I hope you're all doing great, and I want to welcome you back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Jordan. I'm the mind behind Make More Capital, and today we're coming at you with the midweek update in the world of cannabis. Now, before we jump in, if you enjoy this video or you learn something, please just leave a like on it as it really helps out my channel. And of course, if you want to learn how to take advantage of this generational investment opportunity, subscribe below so that you don't miss any future videos, but then there's plenty of content for you to go back, rewatch, and educate yourself with. I try to put all the news and facts in one place so that you can watch episodes over time to learn about the evolution of the industry, identify top companies that you keep seeing pop up, and take advantage whenever you feel ready if you wish to do so. And we're going to start with this news as we get the confirmation that these stays have been lifted on the 185 adult use cannabis dispensary licenses in Illinois. And so apparently as of Friday, or at least as of this week officially, the stays on dozens of adult use cannabis dispensing licenses in Illinois have now been lifted. However, there's likely going to be time from this official lifting to the re-rewarding of these licenses. Apparently, as the Illinois Department of Financial and Professional Regulation is now working on plans to correct the lottery process to ensure it's fair to all applicants. And so maybe that's why the holdup, took place in the first place. But hopefully this doesn't take too long from making this decision to officially awarding those licenses to those who won them in the first place, as opposed to trying to reshuffle to make it fair for everyone, because it seems like they already had the winners. It's just a matter of letting the ball roll. And so with that, we don't know a whole lot yet. I will provide updates, but just happy to share this, as this is big news for Illinois, as they go from having 110 dispensaries to properly supply the demand of 13 million people living in that state to unlocking another 185, which will lead to 395. So obviously we're going to see a lot more sales from 395 versus 110 dispensaries. Just depends how long this takes to actually allow these dispensary owners, likely small business owners and minority entrepreneurs that voted for Schumer and desperately want safe banking. We'll just see how long it takes for them to actually be able to launch their new dispensaries. And so with that, just wanted to share a bit of context, well written by Aaron Idlehite at Mindset Value. And so this is his Substack, but he's writing a little bit on the situation from Illinois after that new decision. So fundamental disconnect in cannabis, how are investors ignoring the news from Illinois? And so with that, just presenting what he's sharing, imagine a $1 billion revenue opportunity that suddenly unlocked itself, and the beneficiaries were 4 or maybe 5 companies, each of whom are estimated to earn around $1 billion in revenue this year before this unexpected windfall. And so these companies won't have to spend much to take advantage of this opportunity, and because of this boon, estimates for next year are too low and probably have to go up by a minimum of 10 or 15% with this new news. One beneficiary may see its cash flow go up by 50%. Then imagine what the stocks most likely to benefit not only did not go up in price, but went down instead. And so despite a population of almost 13 million, there are only 110 dispensaries in Illinois as of right now, and that absurdly low number has supplied the market thus far. And we saw last month sales in April of about 131 million. I forget exactly. However, suddenly this past week, as if by magic, a judge lifted the stays of licenses after an agreement was reached on the lawsuits, and the 185 dispensaries are now free to open. And so while this sounds a little bit different from what we saw down here, just highlighting that now they plan to correct the lottery process to ensure it's fair to all applicants, we just have to wait and see what happens. But obviously, if that doesn't take too long and they can get these open as soon as possible and award these licenses to those who won it in the first place a few years back, that will be big news for a lot of the MSOs that have a nice position in Illinois. And so there's more information down here if you just want to pause to read. I think he uses Cresco as one example that will benefit massively, but just wanted to give you this context as well off of that news. Because while it doesn't seem like much and it's not making a lot of waves, I think it is really big news, and we're going to see a lot of MSOs benefit from it. And so just wanted to share this one from Marijuana Moment as well, updating from what I shared last week that cannabis companies are teaming up to sue the federal government, finally, with all-star legal firm, multi-state operator CEO says. But not all MSOs are taking part in this lawsuit, which after further looking into it is unfortunate, because you think power and numbers would go a long way, especially in a serious matter like this, and for the victory of the industry in the long run. But I'm just glad to see some companies start this process already. And while we don't know the reasons why some of their MSOs are not joining in, it's possible from now until then they might join. It's possible that they might not. I don't know the reasons, so I'm not going to speculate, but just want to share the news that we have as of right now. So this is led by Abner Curtin, founder and CEO of Ascend Wellness Holdings, who told Marijuana Moment in a phone interview on Friday that this is an industry-wide effort with at least 6 major cannabis operators favorably disposed to joining the suits, one of which would focus on stopping the federal government from aspiring interstate cannabis commerce, and another challenging a tax provision known as 280E that blocks the industry from taking tax deductions that that are available to any other companies. And so among the prospective supporters are Cureleaf and TerraSend, which are working with me very closely, Curtin said, and American Trade Association of Cannabis and Hemp as well, ATACH, is also apparently involved in these conversations. And so while he says here about 6 major companies, he only mentions 3 here, and so maybe the other companies did not want to be mentioned yet, but hopefully over time they will be more willing to share, and we can see that more are taking part in helping out. But main thing is I just wanted to highlight what some decisions that have been made in the past to at least show that laws against cannabis in states have been proven unconstitutional from certain few decisions in the past. And so obviously this gives them more confidence that going forward at the federal level, they can make the case just based on things that they have seen in the past. While they'll also be bringing up the federal inconsistency on cannabis enforcement, which was criticized by the conservative U.S. Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas last year as a clear example of why the courts should provide the cannabis industry with the relief that they're seeking. Unfortunately, Thomas, for what it's worth, did rule on the side of cannabis patients in that earlier 2005 case. And of course, if the challenge to cannabis' status under the CSA is successful, Curtin said that it would ultimately give cannabis businesses access to both banking system and the major stock exchanges, which is true, because this would have the same effect of just simply descheduling cannabis from the CSA where it never belonged, because how can something be deemed to have no medical value when now it's legal for medicinal use in 37 states? And clearly it's not as addictive or harmful as some of the other drugs in there like heroin or anything else. And so with that, the longer that these inconsistencies remain in play, the more of a joke that the American democracy looks like. And so it's in their best interest to fix this as soon as possible, obviously, since descheduling cannabis will have major benefits to the American people as well, and will solve many domestic issues. While the second lawsuit that is in the works will make similar arguments but focus on an internal revenue service code known as 280E, thank God, which precludes cannabis businesses from claiming federal tax deductions because under the CSA, they are trafficking in a controlled substance. And so the implications of resolving that IRS issue could also be retroactive too, Curtin said, meaning that cannabis companies that have been deprived of federal tax relief could theoretically amend their past tax returns and receive deductions going back years, potentially making funding that could be an expensive lawsuit with a high-powered legal firm a good investment in the long run. And so obviously that would be if the best case scenario does end up happening. But just to highlight and some of the closing statements, I think that the fact that one of the leading constitutional firms in the US is willing and eager to take this case speaks volumes about the seriousness of the action and the potential likelihood of success, Curtin said. And for his part, Boyes Schiller Flexner co-founder and managing partner Jonathan Schiller told Marijuana Moment in a statement that the firm has no comment on the case at this time, while Curtin, for his part, said that the timing of this legal challenge is no coincidence. As Senate leadership resists the House-passed Safe Banking Act, while members push for a more comprehensive approach, certain advocates and stakeholders are losing patience. Should be shareholders as well, but regardless, adding hopefully this will be another factor so that the Senate says, you know, we've got to get off our asses or we're going to lose this issue to the courts. And while I imagine that's not a good look for the Senate, they clearly don't seem to care based on their actions, as they have been working for their campaign donors and not for the will of the American people, at least the Dems, since they've gotten elected in 2020. And so with that, hopefully it'll put some pressure on them to do their job as opposed to allowing the courts to deem this unconstitutional and make them look hilariously terrible as they have been. But just happy to highlight that the Growth Op is also sharing this story. While we're not seeing it in mainstream outlets, just happy to share we're seeing some outlets cover it, and so over time hopefully it will garner more attention. But just to highlight, as some US cannabis companies see federal structure as unconstitutional. I imagine many Americans and many industries would see it unconstitutional if they were going through the same issues and were facing the same double standards that the cannabis industry is. But fortunately, pot companies could potentially gain access to the banking system if the lawsuit is successful. And so that's wishful thinking, but just happy to update where we sit today. And so going forward, wanted to share a few things. Found this one interesting from Go Blue Canadian. This quote from David Wolf also shared that the biggest thing we're thinking about as we look forward to the future is the prospect of federal legalization of cannabis. And so it sounds like this comes from an industry news update in an email that Go Blue Canadian got. And so just to add, Go Blue Canadian is one of the Canalists who runs a good educational cannabis podcast as well. So I don't know exactly what this means, as most of us in the know are not expecting any form of federal legalization at this point. And while they like to talk about that, we're more likely anticipating some sort of incremental reform, which involves Safe Plus and hopefully some expungement of records and others. But regardless, just wanted to share because I did find this interesting, as apparently David Wolf is the Deputy Administrator of the Alcohol and Tobacco Tax and Trade Bureau at the U.S. Department of the Treasury. And so again, I don't know the context of what this email was necessarily sent in, so just take it with a grain of salt. But he does mention which takes effect January 1st, 2023. So it seems like it's forward-looking and most likely, fairly recent. But with that, just to add, while the Tobacco Tax and Trade Bureau does not take in an official position on federal legalization, they are paying attention as they'll likely be the agency to handle taxation and permitting, and potentially labeling and trade practices as well, according to David. We are working on getting as smart as we possibly can on all things cannabis, he said. We want to make sure we are positioning ourselves to take on this responsibility should it come down the pike and hit the ground running should that happen. And again, that's a lot of shoulds, but just wanted to share this because I found it interesting, and this is a different take from someone actually within a government agency, highlighting that he sees something potentially on the horizon that many of us were not expecting. So take that with a grain of salt, but just happy to share that. And so with that, wanted to highlight this one from New Jersey, as cannabis sales in New Jersey are going strong after a big first month. So we love to hear that, as we waited a very long time, unnecessarily long, for this market to launch. It's been more than a month since New Jersey dispensaries were given the green light to start selling legal recreational cannabis, and after a big first month, cannabis sales are showing no sign of slowing down, which we love to hear. And since some first-time legal buyers are curious, maybe a little anxious at the Botanist in Williamstown, but it isn't stopping them, as demand for legal cannabis in New Jersey remains high a month after its debut. And so just to add a bit of context, I mean, we were anticipating crowds, but to see it in person was definitely a shock for everybody involved, says Tim Wegand with the Botanist said. And of course, wanted to highlight this because the main reason CRC delayed so long is because they were worried that the dispensaries would not be able to supply the adult use. Well, we certainly had enough product. Boom. Sometimes you got to listen to the companies that want to work with you in order to let your state thrive economically. And I think our challenge specifically was trying to have enough staffing in order to serve the new customers that we would be serving. Again, ending cannabis prohibitions, legalizing provides jobs. Weekend explained. Since then, we've really accomplished that, as New Jersey estimates roughly $24 million in cannabis sales in the first month since it began, and that's from just 12 dispensaries alone. And so while they've approved 5 more, and again, we're happy to see Illinois approve another 185, just depends how long that's going to take. Obviously, this is good news for the cannabis industry going forward and for anyone that is focusing on the fundamentals. And so with that, I wanted to share this from Tom Angelos. Apparently, a new study, over the past 20 years, the volume of cannabis research has grown steeply, which is positive, but still calling for descheduling of cannabis so that more research can be done proactively as opposed to reactively. Because although the science base may be biased in that a lot of the research that has grown steeply in the last 20 years has been looking at harms associated with the substance as opposed to actually looking at the medical value of the plant. And so again, this is likely the reason why studies have been focusing on the harms associated with the substance as opposed to the medical use is still the double standard and the fact that cannabis is still a Schedule 1. And so this is just why I harp on descheduling it. It's so important because that will sort of at least remove the double standard, because no longer will it be an illegal plant. So people won't view it as an illegal thing anymore. Fortunately, the good news is that these studies have helped us gather the data that make it impossible to deny that cannabis is a medicine and why cannabis does not belong in the Controlled Substances Act any longer. Unfortunately, some researchers have had the courage to look at these studies objectively and point out the bias in them, as many of them have looked for the harms associated with the substance. Fortunately, they haven't been able to find many, as opposed to actually studying for its medical uses and how it can help the many Americans suffering from pre-existing conditions, pain, inflammation, insomnia, other things like that, and how cannabis can actually help them as a medicine going forward. And so just happy to highlight that more exposure is getting out, that the data doesn't lie, and cannabis is a medicine. And just wanted to relay that to this old article that I found from the LA Times. And I do recommend reading this article because it's very informative and gives you a look into the current situation of how power and politics works in America right now. But regardless, this also does make me optimistic that we're at a cannabis tipping point, because despite the big pull that Big Pharma has and influence on politicians like Chuck Schumer, who, for example, they paid $223,000 in 2020 to delay any sort of cannabis legislation, and to this day, it seems like based on his actions, he's worked for Big Pharma as opposed to the American people who voted for him and all the small business owners and minority entrepreneurs who bought his social justice crap. The reality is that we're also seeing massive support from other massive industries like, for example, the American Bankers Association, the Insurers Association, all these other industries that will make a lot of money simply not from legalizing, but from opening up the banking and allowing cash to be brought in. And so for that reason, just wanted to recommend you go through this, because while you can read this and see like, oh God, cannabis will never be legalized just because of the sway Big Pharma has and the money they spend on lobbying, it's good to see the support that we've been seeing over time build, because this will offset all of the power that Big Pharma has. And so I just recommend pausing to read some of the disgusting statistics that you'll learn here just about pharmaceutical donations to the 2020 election. But with that, there's a lot through this. I don't want to go through the whole thing, but for example, the report published in the Health Economics Journal on Good Friday, do with that what you will, has said that results suggested substitution away from prescription drugs and potential cost savings for state Medicaid programs in states where cannabis is legal and where recreational is also legal. And so I wonder how Big Pharma took this news. It is already spending more than any other industry to fight cost-cutting measures, and cannabis legalization would be a huge cost to them because it would eat into their market share. Now every cannabis dispensary or grower in America is potentially a threat. And so again, while that sounds bad, it's how much more is Big Pharma willing to spend to keep things the way they are? Because in 1960, the national health expenditures represented 5% of GDP. Today, it's at an all-time high of 19.7%, which is disgusting. But, they make money by Americans being very unhealthy. As last September, when the Democrats' proposal to cut prices faltered in the House committee, 2 of the 3 moderates who voted against it received more than $100,000 each from the drug lobby, according to a stat analysis. And this is a very blunt truth that many don't like to hear, and it does explain how we got to where we are today. We've never had the support from other massive associations and industries in the US at the same time. And so that, again, just makes me optimistic. So with that, just wanted to revisit this last sentence. And this is why we should be keeping our eyes on the money. And that's why I'm focusing on the $25 billion in this industry. That's too much cash to not have in banks, and the banks want that cash just as much as Big Pharma want to keep cannabis illegal. And so, while Big Pharma was already on red alert with rumblings of price-cutting legislation, now on the heels of studies that found a drop in prescription drug usage among Medicare enrollees with access to medical cannabis, comes a report of a similar pattern in recreational usage. Ending prohibition could pose a significant challenge to drug industry leaders, with shareholders consumed with the bottom line. And could this be part of the reason why Congress is in no rush to do so? And it has seemed like they have been in no rush to do so since they've been elected, even up until April 20th, 2022, when this is written up until now. But with that, I do show you some interesting stats, because at the same time, this is likely making Big Pharma sweat in their pants. As adults age 55 and over, thank you NORML for sharing this, are the fastest growing demographic reporting cannabis use in the US. And I'm sure many of them are switching from opioids that they've used for a long time, realizing that cannabis is just a better medicine for them, or at least living with the conditions that they happen to have. And so you can read more about cannabis use by older populations in this NORML fact sheet, but 1 in 5 Medicare recipients acknowledge consuming cannabis for symptom reliefs. You know Big Pharma hates that, and you also know that Big Pharma also hates the support we're seeing from other industries. But with that as well, what do Zoomers like? Not booze, apparently. One comes from Bloomberg, and so while this does not put as much of a dent in Big Pharma's market share as the last story would, it does lead us to believe that maybe Zoomers would switch to would turn to medical cannabis as opposed to opioids for any sort of pain relief or medicine if they needed that. But also, this does remind me that alcohol is another one of the massive industries that are now lobbying for cannabis, along with the American Bankers Association, as opposed to lobbying against it like they have for many years, much like Big Pharma. And so now we're seeing big alcohol actually switch sides and lobby for cannabis, because they realize that their future is brighter if they can get into these pot companies and own them in time, as opposed to booze, because the numbers are showing us that younger demographics are turning to cannabis as opposed to booze. And so obviously Big Pharma won't like that, but just to highlight that many more industries are lobbying for cannabis than ever before. And as we know, of people aged 18 to 24, 69% prefer cannabis to alcohol, according to a recent survey by New Frontier Data, a cannabis research firm. So there's more information that you can get out of here, but just wanted to highlight this, as this does sort of just build on the last point I wanted to make, that with so many industries lobbying for cannabis, I think we're going to get to a tipping point. And if we don't get legalization, which again, I don't think we're going to get in the coming years, we will likely get safe. And even if we don't get safe under the Dems, we'll likely get it under the Republicans, because the Republicans will be more friendly to all the lobbying from American Bankers Association, alcohol companies as well, and they would most likely see the benefit of getting that $25 billion or $30 billion in cash by next year off the streets and into the banks. So all these industries that deal with cash will also be able to benefit and make money from the thriving cannabis industry. And so with that, wanted to share this snippet from Viridian on US cannabis from Todd Harrison, highlighting year-to-date EBITDA surprises versus net stock performance. And so I wanted to just read this first before we look at that, because reading this first helped me understand that graph. And so just wanted to share this, as it is some beneficial news. Thankfully, some rationality is perceptible in the data. The 6 companies that best estimates from Curaleaf, Cura, rightward on the graph, had an average performance of more than 20 points above the other MSOs, solid evidence that investors do care about individual earnings from certain companies. And so with that, Viridian recommends investors should increasingly focus on profitability and liquidity as the strong macro headwinds continue to buffet the market. It is tempting to cynically believe that legalization is all that matters, but the data says otherwise. And this is why it is still very important to focus on fundamentals. But so just to highlight what they're saying here, is that this mostly serves as a reminder to me as why focusing on the fundamentals do matter, because based on what they're showing here, Curaleaf and to the right, these were companies that did exceed their EBITDA estimates in their most recent earnings. And I mean, despite Trulieve, which has sadly been, treated the worst, but probably the most, forward-looking company that you'd want to invest in based on the valuations versus the growth that they're going to see in the coming years. These companies that did beat their expectations happen to see the biggest jump or increases in their share prices compared to the rest of the MSOs. And so again, this is more just them trying to point out little things to look for, but just wanted to share this as it's more information that you can use to store in your toolbox that can help you maybe make better investment decisions go forward. And so with that as well, did want to share this thread from DNBC, as I found it was very informative. So he is a former sell-sider CFA focused on MSOs and other growth industries. Don't take his tweets too seriously, but did want to share this because while I'm optimistic and I have a longer time horizon, I understand that not everyone is as passionate about descheduling the cannabis plant as I am, and not everyone has the same time horizon as I do. And so while I focus on the fundamentals and I'm willing to wait, not everyone can, and while the share prices have taken a beating, wanted to just share this to highlight that while we're optimistic going forward as the stage is set and there are many potential catalysts, it's also possible that we will not get any sort of legislative change, so we have to plan accordingly, and you have to be aware that this could be a reality going forward. So as we approach month 17 of the downward trend in MSO stocks, again, I know it's unbelievable, especially if you focus on the fundamentals, but because of the delay and just how long this has taken, there's been a big increase in finger pointing at the sector's bigger accounts for not highlighting the risks. And I thought it might be helpful to run through some risks as I see it. But again, there's always risk in investing in assets. You just have to understand that that's risk number one. Know that there's risk. So disclaimer, I'm long a basket of tier 1 MSOs and see potential for big returns. For structure though, I've broken down the risks into 1 macro, 2 fundamental, and 3 legislative. The goal isn't to spook people, just to provide some balance. And yes, this would have been more helpful in February 2021. Final disclaimer, this is a very simplified version of these risks. And in reality, they are much more complicated than this and hard to put into 140 characters. But so with that, I'll just leave the snippet here so you can pause to read the main ones: inflation, recession, and war. Obviously, some big things in the macro market going on right now. Now, fundamental risks, price and margin compression, markets maturing too quickly, demand growth slowdown, and then so you can pause to read for the snippets of the fundamental risks here. And then legislative risks. Oh boy, 280E burns a hole in the pockets. I'm not going to read all through them, but safe banking doesn't lead to uplisting, interstate commerce, Fed legislation, so you can pause to read for a little bit more context on what he adds in there. And then just in general, anti-business rhetoric, limited licenses go to unqualified experienced operators, FDA involvement, scientific research uncovers unfavorable long-term health impacts. That's possible, though doubtful based on the data we've gathered. Other unknown risks, aliens, asteroids, and other viruses. And so there it is, pick your poison. But I just think it's funny that someone goes down here. The biggest risk for me is margin compression and decline in pricing, more competitive. He also says, I don't see the moat others see. You don't see the moat that the tier 1, the 5 tier 1 MSOs are able to build right now, especially from the Dems not passing SAFE, which has crushed the small businesses and minority entrepreneurs, leading the top tier 1 MSOs to just thrive, and then this Rich Richard. You don't see the moat. And so again, while there are a lot of risks, there are also a lot of catalysts and reasons to be forward-looking, especially since we've waited this long at this point. But again, I can't make that call. Only you can plan accordingly for your own situation, but just wanted to provide that context. And so with that, wanted to share this one from Mugglehead magazine as they provide or share this analyst from a report that legal cannabis market is projected to have steady growth until 2030, and this will be helped from many states reforming their laws and the organic, and as we see the organic total addressable market expand from states doing so. But the industry is set to expand by approximately $155 billion between 2020 and 2030. Now, I think this is optimistic that the U.S. might, take the lead and deschedule cannabis, and then we'll see Germany also do the same thing in Europe, and then we'll see the rest of the globe follow. That will likely lead to these big numbers, but I don't see this coming from the US, Canada or anything like that alone. But with that, just wanted to share a bit of this from Mugglehead, as a new report found that the market for legal cannabis is anticipated to project a noteworthy compounded annual growth rate of 26.55% in 2030. And while we do see this from many different reports, just take this as speculation because we don't know what's actually going to happen in time. And there are a lot of factors that lead into this, but as countries across the globe continue to legalize recreational cannabis, industry growth shows no signs of slowing. As in fact, the legal cannabis market is expected to proliferate all the way up to US $178.5 billion by 2030, according to report linker data released on Friday. Now keep in mind, this is just a report, so take it as speculation and not as fact, but the unfortunate thing is they don't share a link to the report linker data, so probably it's paid data and they don't have a free report. But the main thing and why they see so much potential revenue added is that report linker also claims that the growth in this industry is partly attributed to the rising rates of chronic diseases and the benefits associated with cannabis use for those suffering from these chronic conditions. And relief from symptoms brought on by chemotherapy treatments such as chronic pain, vomiting, and nausea serves as a good example of why cannabis legalization is becoming more generally acceptable in society. And so there are a few more links in here if you wanted to grab this link and then pull those links of other reports just to learn about, what they see as a potential opportunity for this industry in the coming decade. Legal cannabis markets expected to grow to US $48.3 billion by 2028 from Vantage, while another US legal and illicit cannabis sales totaled US $97 billion in 2021 in another report. But again, this could always just be clickbait. So this is why I try to focus on what we're seeing right now, what we're seeing unlock, like New Jersey, like Illinois, and how regardless this is just going to be beneficial for the top 5 US MSOs, the tier 1s that have these footprints in these states and that are going to benefit from at least the growth coming forward in the next few years. And so I don't look that far ahead, but just happy to highlight this. Well, a bit of news from the MSOs this week is apparently Verano announces exclusive partnership with the Weldon Project's Mission Green to advance the organization's cannabis clemency and advocacy initiative. So happy to see that Verano is working with Weldon Angelos, as he is one of the main spokespeople working with the White House as well, working on pardons and clemency for current nonviolent cannabis offenders. And so the partnership represents Verano's largest national fundraising campaign to give to date, supporting cannabis criminal justice reform. So again, you cannot say that these companies are not doing what they can to give back and help the communities that they're investing in by giving back and fundraising on their behalf. In addition to its initial $50,000 contribution to Mission Green, beginning June 3rd, 2022, Verano will match up to $13,000 in customer and patient-generated donations on the first Friday of each month. And fundraising campaigns span the company's nearly 100 dispensaries across 13 states in honor of the 13 years that Weldon Angelos, founder of the Weldon Project and Mission Green, served in prison for cannabis-related charges. So there's more information down here if you wanted to read, but just happy to highlight that, again, MSOs are the ones giving back, and so while the government wants to see the MSOs try and do more, while the government does nothing, that's horseshit. So you feel good about investing in these US MSOs because they're doing way more than the government to change the status quo for the better, right the past wrongs, and give back to the communities most harmed by the failed war on drugs. And so with that, just wanted to highlight that we could be nearing bottom. Now again, I don't like to make any calls like that, but just thought this was funny, and sharing this from Logic Prevails, as he highlights positive news for those looking for signs of capitulation, when the loudest in February of 2020 saying this is the greatest investment opportunity that they've ever seen are now saying that they give up on cannabis legalization. And then again, we all in the know knew that cannabis legalization wasn't going to happen. We're waiting on the incremental reform that would allow safe harbor language to allow institutions to invest and allow eventual uplisting. That's what we're mostly invested for, but we know that legalization will come eventually. But just to quote what Ross said, I've given up on cannabis legalization. Oh, sounds like he's down and out based on the share prices, not based on looking at the fundamentals. The Democrats have failed us, but that is very true. They claim social equity, but in reality, they don't care. It's just been virtue signaling, as they've literally done nothing. Yes, you, Kamala Harris, you've done nothing to end Jim Crow laws in America. Cory Booker, where's Chuck Schumer? And so with that, I just wanted to share this funny meme from CCVisuals, because it is true. Gerber at all-time highs. This is the single best investment opportunity I've ever seen. Gerber at lows. The stock won't go up, and I'm giving up. So again, I don't want to try and call bottom. I'm not someone that tries to make any sort of calls, but maybe this is the sign that we're finally getting there. And regardless, wanted to share a few more stories. This one from Todd Harrison, highlighting that apparently a cannabis strain with 20% more THC engineered by Hebrew University researchers. For the first time ever, engineers enhanced cannabis strains with 20% more THC, an accomplishment that'll help develop new strains and increase crop yield. So it's amazing what you can figure out when you're allowed to research cannabis for its potential medical uses, as opposed to looking for potential harms associated with it. And good thing that they haven't been able to find any. But with that, wanted to share this study as well that comes from Eat This Not That, as apparently cannabis may offer safe relief from this disease, says new study. Is medical cannabis about to go mainstream? It should, and it's very long overdue. And so with that, there's a snippet here that you can pause to read, but not going to spend too much time, but I will let you pause to read just if you wanted to learn more about what this says, as how medical cannabis improves quality of life. So for example, cancer patients, and most people sadly do end up getting cancer at some point in their life in this day and age. The study released by Israeli researchers shows that medical cannabis not only helps cancer patients with pain management, it also improves overall quality of life and provides a safe alternative to opioids, as patients described a 20% drop in pain and a 22% reduction in anxiety. And so those are phenomenal findings, and that is definitely reason to deschedule the cannabis plant and reason for Big Pharma to be very scared. So you can read a little bit more about the details on that. And then so secondly, could medical cannabis replace opioids? Big Pharma hates to hear that, but one interesting outcome of the Israeli research showed that after 6 months of medical cannabis treatment, nearly half of the 324 cancer patients stopped using other pain drugs completely. And so traditionally, cancer-related pain is mainly treated with opioid analgesics, but some oncologists perceive opioid treatment as hazardous, so alternative therapies are required, says researcher David Marai from the Technion Israeli Institute of Technology in Haifa. And so cannabis is highly effective as pain relief, and so I'm not going to read through this all, but you can pause to read this snippet here. As we know from studies over the years that cannabis certainly does, and cannabis is not a treatment for cancer. So just a little bit more information if you wanted to read a bit more. In that snippet here, you can pause to read. And should the law change? I think it's long overdue, and we know that the law should change. But again, that's not up to us. It's up to those in Congress, and the best thing the American people can do is hold them accountable in November if they don't do anything from now until then. And so lastly, just wanted to share this story from inews.co.uk. As Spain looks at legalizing medicinal cannabis and $1 billion industry to grow it. Now, this is the first I'm hearing out of this, so I'm not going to go through this article because it's just talk as of right now, and I would like to share more news when they actually start making steps towards, introducing legislation and getting this done. But apparently, patients should be in the hands of the state and the doctors. In fact, probably, if you view cannabis as a medicine, not the drug traffickers. And the only reason it's in the hands of the drug traffickers right now is because the government for whatever silly reason, views cannabis as a drug and something bad, not as a medicine and something good, says Carola Perez, the president of the Spanish Observatory of Medical Cannabis. And so hopefully we'll see some progress out of this. I just wanted to share this as this is really the only update I've gotten. And so with that, wanted to bring you to new cannabis ventures, as after all the earnings have come through, we now have a fully updated list, and these are the largest revenue-producing publicly traded cannabis companies for the month of May. And so there's more information in this highlighting tracker rules and how he tracks changes over time, so you can pause to read the snippet if you'd like. Well, he adds a note about adjusted operating income, and so if you wanted to pause to read about how he changes this, you can do so. While tracker inclusion updates, so I think this is if he adds any new companies or removes any, while including companies that reported in May. So as we have it up to date, senior US dollar reporting companies, and this does include the largest revenue generating plant touching companies, Trulieve, Curaleaf, Green Thumb Industries, Cresco Lab, Verano Holdings, as well as other companies that do not deal with plant touching, but they supply these companies like Scott's Miracle Grow and a few others like the auxiliary ones. But so this gives you a list of the senior US dollar reporting that trade on the over-the-counter or US major exchanges. Well, we've got the junior US dollar reporting, which I believe will only trade on the over-the-counter. We've got a few that do also can uplist on the NASDAQ apparently. Well, if we look at the Canadian dollar reporting, these are the senior and most mature Canadian cannabis companies. Well, if we scroll down, we see the junior Canadian dollar reporting. And so just wanted to share this as this is up to date after the most recent earnings. And so you can use them to compare companies and just, an all-in-one spot to help add to your toolbox and compare with any other resources that you have to go through the fundamentals. But with that, just want to take you to this ranking page, which will highlight all of it for you in one place. Public cannabis company revenue and income tracker. And so with that, this is the senior US dollar reporting. If you scroll down, you get all the rest, but this highlights Trulieve as the #1 leading MSO based on revenue in the most recent quarter, then Curaleaf, Green Thumb, Cresco, Verano, with all the other tier 2 and tier 3 MSOs, and then all the other companies here. So just wanted to leave you at that, as you can look across the board and see their symbol, their non-US symbol, their for most recent quarter ended, their quarterly sales, quarter-over-quarter growth, year-over-year growth, adjusted operating income, and next financial. So this is just another resource you can favorite or just add along with others that you can compare with over time to make better investment decisions, especially in this cannabis industry going forward. But that is it for today's episode, folks. So I want to thank you so much for tuning in, and I really hope you got some value out of it. What did you think of the stories mentioned? Let me know in the comments if you have any questions or suggestions, and I'd be happy to address them. But besides that, if you enjoyed this video and you learned something, please just leave a like on it. Subscribe below if you don't want to miss any future videos, and I will catch you on Sunday for This Week in Cannabis News. Have a great week, everybody.